Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual program, Top 10 Sensory Plants, presented by Missouri Botanical Garden Therapeutic Horticulture Program. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the manager of adult services at St. Louis County Library. I'd like to share some information with everyone before we begin. We're live right now, and this program is being recorded. This is a webinar, so we cannot see or hear you, but you're certainly welcome to submit questions and comments in the chat box. They'll be addressed at the end as time allows. Also, this program is being captioned. To show captions, click that CC button on your Zoom panel near the chat box and select Show Subtitles. You can also select Hide Subtitles if you wish. Missouri Botanical Garden will be back again next month for the virtual program Deepening Your Connection with Nature for Well-Being on Wednesday, June 15th at 2 p.m. Learn how to use any experience with nature to create moments of wonder and feel the benefit of improved well-being. I'll put a link in the chat box to register for that one. We do have a virtual sign-in sheet for this program. Thank you so much for filling it out before you leave today. Now, I'm happy to introduce today's presenter, Sammy Ruzicka. She's an instructor of therapeutic horticulture at Missouri Botanical Garden. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Sammy. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all.
Looks good.
All right, thanks. All right, hi everyone. So excited to be with you all today to talk about our top 10 favorite sensory plants for your garden. Just like Rebecca said, my name is Sammy. I am an instructor of therapeutic horticulture with the Missouri Botanical Garden. So today I'm going to start off with you all kind of giving you an introduction to therapeutic horticulture, what that is and what we do at the garden. We're also going to talk about some things to consider if you're interested in gardening with sensory plants. And then I'm going to go through our top 10 list. So this top 10 list of plants that we have today all came from a blog article that we wrote last year that's on the Missouri Botanical Gardens blog, Discover and Share. So a link for that is at the very top of the chat when you look in there. And I think we'll share it again later on just to make sure that you have it. But that blog post has a ton of information on it. It has all the plants we're going to talk about, and it also has links on it where you can go to the plant finder page, which is a Missouri Botanical Gardens plant database. So for each plant, you can go to that page, see all the information about the plant, how to grow it, and all those good things. Oops, this is not letting me. There we go. All right, so what is therapeutic horticulture? So to put it simply, therapeutic horticulture is the process of using plant or nature-based activities with the intention of improving one's overall well-being in some way, whether that be physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, all those good things. So this can be done by attending a therapeutic horticulture program or class where you're working with plants. Like in this picture here, I'm doing flower arranging with someone. That's a popular activity we use, but it's also something you can practice by going on a walk or a hike outdoors, gardening, caring for house plants, or using natural materials in different creative projects. So some people use the terms therapeutic horticulture and horticultural therapy kind of interchangeably, but just for the sake of definitions, I'll just get that out of the way. They are a bit different. So horticultural therapy is much more clinical. It's something where usually a horticultural therapist might work in a setting like a hospital with a PT or OT. A clinical setting like that, they work with clients over the long term to meet some kind of health goal that they have. And to do horticultural therapy, you have to be registered through the American Horticultural Therapy Association. What we do at the garden is a little bit different. So therapeutic horticulture, it's still something that is led by someone who is trained in the field. So myself, I have my master's in social work. I'm a master gardener, and I also have a certificate of horticultural therapy. So those all lend themselves to leading these programs. But the practices within therapeutic horticulture that we use in our programs are something that you can use in your everyday life to have a more therapeutic gardening or nature experience when you're outdoors or when you're working with plants. So some of the things that we like to emphasize in our programs is focusing on the process, not the product. So treating gardening like an experiment. There's a lot of things in the garden that are out of our control. And even though we want our participants to have the most success as possible when they are gardening, I think treating it like an experiment makes it something that you're more curious about. And if something does go wrong, or if a plant doesn't grow the way that you wanted it to, you can treat it as a learning experience and be more focused on the process of gardening, the process of growing these plants, and enjoying that in the moment instead of being so focused on the end result. And what we're going to talk about today is engaging the senses. We find that when we are engaging our senses, when we're outside and working with plants, it really deepens our connection to nature and gives you a much more therapeutic experience that way. And it's just a way to be a little bit more engaged when you're outside gardening, or even if you're just out on a walk in the park. So we think a lot about mindfulness in our programs too. This is just being present in the moment, trying to leave those everyday worries and stresses behind and just be present in the moment in nature with what you're doing. So we find, again, that when you're engaged with these plants that have a lot of sensory interest, it's just a little bit easier for us to focus our intention on the moment and really enjoy the plants in the moment that we're in. All right, so I think for many of us gardeners, we already know that there's a lot of benefits to gardening and being in nature, but over the past few decades, there have been a lot of studies coming out researching the different health and well-being aspects of engaging with nature. So these are just a few. It can lower your blood pressure, reduce stress hormone levels in the body. It can also reduce nervous system arousal. So this means if you're feeling overwhelmed, when you feel like your brain's going a mile a minute, if you're feeling anxious or nervous, having difficulty focusing or kind of quieting your mind, getting out into nature or into your gardening practice can really help calm down that nervous system, calm down your mind, and in turn, just calm you down in general. This can lead to feeling more relaxed and restoring your ability to focus on the present moment or the task in front of you. Gardening can also enhance your immune function. So research has found that working in the garden strengthens the immune system because there's a lot of beneficial bacteria present in the soil. So when you're engaging with the soil, you're getting your hands in the dirt, you're getting exposed to that beneficial bacteria. And being outside can alleviate some allergy symptoms too, the more you get out there, which I know can be an issue for a lot of us in the St. Louis region for sure. It can also increase your self-esteem. So helping any plant grow is definitely a big feat, I think. And many people, when we're getting started gardening, it can be a little intimidating or overwhelming. There's a lot of information. Every plant has different needs. So it can be a lot to take in. But having those little successes and learning how to cultivate your own plants is a really satisfying process. And I think a lot of times we can surprise ourselves with what we're capable of. It can then also reduce anxiety. It can improve your mood overall. I know for myself, if I'm having a rough day, a rough morning, and I get out into my garden or I take a walk in a nearby park, it can really turn my whole mood around. And I can feel the positive effects of that. Social inclusion as well. We are lucky to live in an area where there are a ton of different gardening clubs based on where you live. We have the Master Gardener program, which is a great way to meet other gardeners, lots of volunteer opportunities, and lots of community gardens to participate in. So if you're looking for a way to meet new people, or maybe to connect with other people in your life, getting out and gardening or being in nature is a great way to do that. And also learning useful skills. So growing plants is not only a really fun hobby, it's good for us, it's good for the environment, but it's also very practical. So you can learn how to grow your own food, preserving your harvest, and growing things like herbs for cooking and making tea. All right, so now we're going to get into gardening for the senses. So again, with terminology, I want to talk about what a sensory garden is. So a sensory garden is a space that is highly engaging. It's a place where you can interact with the plants and really immerse yourself in the environment. And most of all, a place that's going to bring joy. Technically, all gardens appeal to our senses. Every garden is going to have an engaging sensory experience for us, but sensory gardens are places that are really designed with the intention of appealing to all of our senses. So all of them, from touch, smell, taste, hearing, all of those good things. I think that even just adding a few sensory plants into an existing garden space is great for boosting the interest and engagement in that area. So you don't need to have a full-blown sensory garden, but you can put in a few of these suggestions or other plants that you like as well, just to kind of create a little bit more of an interactive, engaging space. And all of the plants discussed today, they can be grown in ground, in garden beds, or in containers. So as long as you have a little bit of sun and preferably an outdoor space for most of these, you can really grow pretty much all the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So things to consider when you're creating your sensory garden or adding sensory plants to your space. Find plants that engage multiple senses. So you can find a sensory plant. For example, one we're going to talk about today is peppermint scented geranium. It has scent. It has a wonderful texture. It can be used in arrangements. It can be pressed or dried. So choose those plants that have a lot of different sensory aspects to them. You'll get the most out of all these different plants that way. Also consider if the plants you choose are safe or pleasant to interact with. So if you're looking for a highly engaging sensory plant, maybe stray away from plants that have thorns or needles on them, or also consider if the plants are toxic in any way. There are some plants that are popular in landscaping that are very beautiful and interesting, that may be not so great for our health, especially if you have young children or pets out in the yard. Try to go for safe plants. Also, plants that have multiple uses outside of the garden. So one thing that we really love is putting as many herbs as possible in a garden, because herbs can have so many different uses. You can have a plant that has a beautiful flower for arrangements, something with great scent, great taste. It can be used in cooking. It can be dried. So things that go beyond just living in the garden, things that you can incorporate into your everyday life as well. And I forgot to put this bullet point on here, but last but not least, make it your own. So these plants today, it's honestly very hard to make a top 10 list of our favorite sensory plants, because there are so many options, especially nowadays when it comes to herbs and interesting edible plants. The nurseries that we have in our area have a ton of different varieties of a bunch of different things. So I definitely encourage you to explore either in any gardens near you or nurseries. Engage with the different plants that they have there, see what you like. I think having space that's going to be the most engaging is a space that you really love. So yeah, make it your own in that way. All right, so now we're going to get into the different plants. So first and foremost is lemon verbena. This is one of our favorite herbs. It has a fantastic lemon scent to it, I liken it to like a lemon starburst. It's like a very sweet candy scent to it. It also has some nice texture in the leaves as well. This is an annual herb in our area, grows in full sun. It can get about 2 to 4 feet tall. If you're going to grow this in a container, I'd say pick a rather large one. They can get quite big. It flowers occasionally, more often when it's been planted in ground where it has more space. And the flowers you can see here on the left, they're very cute. They're like these little purple stems with lavender flowers. And all parts of this plant are edible. So people use the flowers in cooking. The leaves are really great for using in cooking or making tea. It can be dried really easily if you want to save it for the winter months. And this plant also likes to be harvested from. So harvesting from it throughout the season is going to give it a really, really nice bushy growth shape. It's used a lot for perfumes and cosmetics. So a lot of people, when they smell it, they're like, this smells like potpourri. It's like very common in those types of things. And it has also been used as herbal medicine. People use it for colds, fevers, and to aid in digestion. So taking it in tea form that way. The leaves, they also press really nicely and they keep their scent for a really long time. And I will say, just an observation for myself, I grow these in my yard every year and they get covered in praying mantises. So I have yet to find information on if they attract them or not. But if you like to have praying mantis in your yard, then I suggest planting one of these and seeing if it attracts them to your space. All right, next up we have scented geraniums. There are an unlimited amount of scented geraniums out these days. So these plants, they are related to our typical like landscaping flowering geranium that you see often, especially the ones with like the big red flower heads, but they're a little bit different. So as you can see in these pictures, it's mostly the leaves that you see on this plant. They do have flowers, but they don't flower super often, and the flower heads do stay very tiny. They're very cute, but this plant is planted mostly for its foliage and not so much its flowers. It's an annual herb in our area, but it can be brought in the winter months and kept as a house plant. It's also really easy to propagate from it. If you're going to grow it in ground, it really likes organically rich, well-draining soils. A lot of these herbs do. And it has fantastic scented leaves and really great texture on these leaves as well. So some of the varieties that I have here on the screen, starting from the left, this is a Dr. Livingston lemon scented geranium. Down below that is a nutmeg geranium. The next one with the pink flowers, that is a rose scented geranium. And all the way on the right is a peppermint scented geranium. And you can see on that peppermint scented geranium that you can see the fuzziness to it. It has this really great fuzzy texture, almost feels like lamb's ear. And the scent in all of these are very strong. So again, people like to dry these. You can use them. Some of them people use in tea. You can also use them for like herb sachets. They press beautifully. They're great for nature printing because of their texture. And they also look really great in flower arrangements as well. And depending on the variety, it's going to change what size it's going to be. So something like the Dr. Livingston geranium, that could get, if you have it in ground or in a very large pot, that could get like 3 feet in height. The nutmeg scented geranium, those ones are a little bit more compact and smaller. They might only get 1 foot. So when you're looking at the different varieties they have in nurseries, just make sure to look on the back of the tag what variety you have and how large it's going to get to determine where you want to put that in your space. All right, next we have Glom Globe amaranth. The scientific name for this is Gomphrena globosa. We usually call this Gomphrena, but people say globe amaranth as well. This is an annual in our area. Again, full sun. It blooms from June to frost. So this is a super long blooming plant to have in the garden. It's really easily grown in average, well-draining soils. It has these beautiful showy flowers with really interesting textures to them. They're very sturdy flowers. They almost feel papery to the touch, and they come in all different varieties of colors. So there's super bright ones in reds and purples and pinks. There's more muted pastel ones. The one over here on the bottom right, that one is called Gomphrena fireworks. So you can see a little bit more of a close-up on the top right corner. That's actually a picture I took at the sensory garden at the botanical garden of a little snake that wrapped itself around it. But those ones have these really beautiful little yellow flowers poking up from the flower head. So it literally looks like a little firework. And it also has a very interesting scent, almost like curry or a spice like that. So the true flowers are actually very small in there, but you get these bright bracts around the flowers. So those are those colorful pieces that we're seeing there. And they almost, some people think they're clover. They look kind of similar to clover. But the flowers, what we use them for mostly is in arrangements, and they dry beautifully. They keep their shape and their color for a very long time. So all you have to do is bundle them up, hang them upside down. You can see I have some, well, if you can see my picture, I'm not sure if you can, but I have some plants drying behind me. They look great in dried arrangements. I think they look great just hang drying in a room because they have such beautiful colors. And when you're harvesting them for drying, it's good to do that pretty soon after they bloom, just so the flower heads don't fall apart once they are dried. All right, next we have ruby grass. This is a favorite of ours in the sensory garden. This variety is called pink crystals, and I'm not sure how well you can see it in photos, but I think the one on the top left best shows the flower heads on this grass really sparkle in the sunshine. They're really, really beautiful. So this, again, this is an annual full sun, best grown in light, well-draining soils. And it blooms from July to August. So it's a little bit later in the summer when it starts to bloom. It can get up to about 2 feet tall and about 1.5 feet wide. It has these great showy pink flowers that are super soft. And the foliage is kind of this greenish blue. So really interesting colors. And when you run your hands over the flowers, it feels like a feather duster. They're so soft and delicate, and such a great texture. They're really easy to harvest. You just pluck the little flower heads and they come out of this like little tube that they grow into. And they're really great for using in arrangements as well. I have also pressed the flowers. You want to get them before they start blooming. When they start blooming, they're more white, almost like a white silvery color. And if you get them really early like that and you press them, they keep like that for a very long time, and they keep that really smooth, silky texture to them as well. All right, next we have coneflower, also known as echinacea. This is a Missouri native plant, which is always exciting. They are full sun and they can tolerate a little bit of shade as well. They bloom from June to August, so Again, we really love these long blooming plants that have interest in the garden for a long time. This is a perennial as well, so it naturalizes whatever area you plant in by freely self-seeding if you leave the seed heads on in the fall, so letting those seed heads dry. The flower is very beautiful, and it has this cone in the middle that has this wonderful orange color to it. The leaves have kind of like a little bit of a fuzzy, interesting texture to them. The seed heads and the flowers can be used in arrangements, and it's also really great for attracting pollinators to your garden. It's a plant that does really well in our area. It can grow in poor soils. Native plants are great like that. They take a lot less effort and resources to grow. So this is such a wonderful one to have in any garden space. I enjoy leaving the flower heads on these in the fall. So you can see on the bottom right, they add a lot of winter interest to the garden when you leave them. These are the seed heads that have had some frost on them, and I think they just look really beautiful that way. It also will feed the birds through the winter as well. They come and eat those seeds from the seed heads, especially goldfinches seem to really like them. Echinacea is also a popular herb used in tea. Most of the plant, so everything pretty much besides that cone in the middle, can be used to make tea. So you can dry the roots, stems, leaves, and the flower petals to make tea from it. I will say echinacea, you'll see it a lot in like immunity boosting teas, even at the grocery store nowadays in the herbal tea section. It can interact with some medication, so always check up with that. Check up with a doctor if you are on any medications to make sure that's not going to interact. And I will say, if you are interested in growing echinacea for tea and harvesting off of it, make sure to grow the plant in your own yard. Even though this is a native plant, this is a wildflower, it is protected in Missouri. So you can't go out and harvest this in the wild. You have to grow it on your own. All right, next is lavender. Definitely a very popular sensory plant. This one, it can bloom from June to August, kind of depending on what variety you have. Most blooms happen earlier on the summer, like usually early June is whenever you start seeing them. They can get anywhere from 2 to 3 feet tall and spread about 2 to 4 feet. Again, these are full sun. They really like dry to medium well draining soil. And there's so many different varieties of lavender to choose from these days. The one that we grow at the sensory garden at the botanical garden is called Provence. That is because it's one of the few varieties that are perennial in our area. So if you want a lavender that's going to come back every year, Provence is the way to go. There's a lot of other really interesting varieties, though, that you can grow as an annual if you would like. They have really fantastic showy purple flowers that you can see here with an amazing scent. The whole plant is scented. So even when the flowers are done blooming, you still have this nice kind of lavender shrub. Some people confuse it for rosemary. It almost looks a little bit like rosemary. But even throughout the summer and the winter months, if you have the perennial variety, you can still get a lot of scent out of those leaves. So you can crush up those leaves, dry them, use them in potpourris or sachets or whatever you would like. And of course, the flowers dry really beautifully too. You can see that in the picture here on the right. So harvesting those blooms throughout their bloom time is a great way to get more dried flowers if you're interested in like dried arrangements, or even harvesting this and drying it and making tea with it later on. And with the sachets too, some people like to make lavender sachets for any type of animal fiber clothing that you have. It keeps moths away. So it's great to have little sachets in your clothing drawers. to make sure moths don't get to your clothes. All right, next we have Celosia. This one has many different names. So some people call it rooster comb, some people call it coxcomb. I've heard lots of different names for this group of plants. So there's a few different types of Celosia out there. On the left, all the way to the left, that kind of rainbow of Celosia over there, that is the plumosa group. So they have those nice plumy flowers at the top. The picture on the top with the pink blooms, that is the spicata group of Celosia. And then the bottom right there, the ones that they almost look like brains, the way that the flower heads are, that is called the cristata group. So these are another very long blooming plant. It blooms from June all the way to frost. And like some of the other plants in here, the height and the spread on these is going to vary depending on the variety that you get. Some of them can get very tall. Some of them can stay a bit shorter. So there are varieties that you can find at nurseries that say shorter if you want to use them in a container. Or this cristata group, the ones that kind of look like brains, those ones can get quite large. So those are often good to grow either in really large containers or in garden beds as well. Again, this is a full sun plant. It is an annual technically, but it does readily reseed itself. So I have had areas in my yard where I grow Celosia. And since when the seed heads are maturing, they just drop these little tiny black seeds everywhere. And the next year, I'll have tiny Celosia plants growing everywhere. I wouldn't describe them as weedy per se. They're very easy to pull. But even as an annual plant, you are very likely to get more coming back the next year. They have a really interesting texture to their flower heads, kind of similar to the gomphrena. A lot of them have a papery texture to them. The spicata group, definitely, the plumosa and the cristata group, those ones have kind of a softer texture to them, but they're very sturdy flowers. And we love them to use in fresh arrangements, but also for drying. They dry amazingly. I have a bunch up drying behind me right now. They keep their shape and their color for a really long time. And when they're drying, they drop their seeds. So if you want to grow more the next year, you can collect the seeds from the dried seed heads, and they usually germinate pretty easily from those. And some of them too that you can see in the picture, especially in the plumosa group, all the way on the left, they have various colors with their stems and leaves. So if you're looking for more color interest in your garden, Celosia is definitely a plant to consider. There are varieties that have yellow stems, bright green stems with bright green leaves, all the way to red stems and leaves, and also kind of like a deep purpley burgundy stem as well. All right, so then we have rosemary. This is a go-to for herb gardens, very loved herb for cooking, has a wonderful savory scent to it. And it also gets these cute purple flowers on it as well. So it blooms usually June to July. Rosemary plants can really depend on what variety you have and how you're growing it when it comes to how tall they're going to get. There are some that get 1 foot tall, they can get 2 feet tall. And if you have a hoop house or a place to overwinter it, they can get up to 6 feet tall. They are usually grown as an annual in our area. They cannot handle our winters. But if you do have a place where you can bring it indoors, you can overwinter it and then bring it back out the next year. This one likes light, slightly acidic, dry, well-draining soils, full sun again. It can tolerate a little bit of light shade though. The flowers are really attractive to butterflies, bees, and other insect pollinators. Again, it has that wonderful fragrance and flavor. There's a variety called barbecue, which is a really interesting one where it has very thick stems. So when the stems get long enough, you can harvest them and you can pull the leaves off of them, dry the leaves for, using as an herb or spice later on. And the stems can be used as a skewer. So you can put meat or vegetables on the skewer for barbecuing, and then it infuses your food with a rosemary flavor, which is really fun. And it can also be added to fresh flower arrangements to add a little bit of scent and texture. We like to do that with a lot of our herbs. All right, and then we have pansies, which are growing right now. They bloom from April to June, a great spring flower to have in the garden. They usually get about 1/2 foot tall, maybe about 1 foot of a spread, depending on how much room they have to grow. So they're a pretty nice compact plant to have. Best grown in kind of consistently moist, well-draining soils. They like full sun. They can tolerate a little bit of shade though as well. The flower petals have a wonderful soft texture to them, and a nice scent as well. And what we love about pansies is the amount of color they bring to the garden. There is an endless number of varieties of pansies to choose from. You can go to a local nursery and find all kinds of different types of pansies, sizes, shapes, colors. And they also do really well for pressing. If you like to make crafts with press plants, the photo in the middle here, that is a craft called flower pounding that pansies do really well at. So you can lay a piece of paper over the pansy, and you can use like a mallet or even the back of the spoon to kind of pound or press the flower onto the paper. And then when you pull it off, it makes this beautiful imprint of the colors of the flower. They're also edible. So some people will toss the flower heads in salads, eating them fresh like that. Apparently they have, I have yet to try one, but apparently they have kind of a wintergreen fresh flavor to them. And they're also used in decorating baked goods as well. So the picture all the way to the right that I have there, people either put them on fresh, or in the case of these cupcakes here, this person candied them. So you use a special sugar to kind of preserve them on both sides, and you can use them that way. And then last but not least, we have thyme. There is a bunch of different varieties of thyme. I feel like every year there are so many more varieties to choose from with these plants. Thyme blooms from June to July, depending on the variety. You might have purple blooms or pink blooms. That can be very cute. Thyme is, for the most part, it's a pretty low growing plant. There are some varieties that can get a little bit tall, but for the most part, they stay lower to the ground. So they can be great to use in garden edges, or if you have an area that you want a ground cover in, thyme is really fantastic for that, especially elfin thyme. So the picture all the way to the right where it has that pathway there, that is elfin thyme that's being grown in that pathway. And when that blooms, usually has like a pink or a light purple flower to it. So it just looks like this beautiful carpeting of pink. And then throughout the summer, if you walk through it or run your hand over it, you'll get that wonderful savory thyme scent to it. These plants are perennial in our area, which is great. They spread, so they're easy to maintain. If you don't like where they're creeping into, you can just simply cut it back. They're pretty easy to contain in that way. So the ones that I have up here, other than the elfin thyme, the one at the very top on the left, that is a lemon thyme. There's a few different varieties of citrus scented thymes, lemon and lime mostly, and they have a really, really wonderful fragrance to them. And then the one on the bottom left there, that is woolly thyme. So woolly thyme is a variety that you can kind of see on there. It's very fuzzy. It's very soft to the touch. So when you rub your hand over it, you get the scent, but you also get this amazing fuzzy texture as well. We've grown that like in the edges of some of our raised beds as something that's easily accessed to touch to get that texture. It's also, of course, used in cooking, can be dried for using like later on in the winter if you want to preserve the herbs. And some people also use it in tea as well. I think some of the lemon thymes would be really good for that also. All right. So there are a number of different garden spaces at the Botanical Garden where you can see these sensory plants growing. So if you're interested in seeing what these look like, how we plant them, or design gardens with different sensory plants and herbs, definitely come out and visit us. The Zimmerman Sensory Garden is our designated sensory garden space. All of the plants in there are grown and meant to be engaged with. We want you to go in there, touch the plants, smell the plants, really engage with that area. We also have the bell tree in there, if you're familiar. That's a popular place for people to go ring the bells. So really getting all of the senses in that space. There is also the Kemper Center for Home Gardening. They have a fantastic garden space. And they have an area that's all herbs. And they also have a lot of flowers and herbs interplanted with their vegetables in that garden space. So you can get inspiration on how to kind of include sensory plants into maybe a vegetable garden, or just interesting different ways to design a garden area. And we also have a designated herb garden that is located just behind Tower Grove House. And that space is maintained and designed by the Herb Society. And they have a wonderful collection of herbs, many different varieties of lots of herbs in there. Again, that's another space where it's great to go in, see what interesting varieties they have, smell things, touch things, really engage with the plants in that space. And if you're also interested in therapeutic horticulture and more information related to that, we do offer a lot of classes through our public programs adult education program. So if you are a member, you probably get our big class list twice a year, tons of classes to choose from. A lot of the ones related to therapeutic horticulture are under our well-being section, and you don't need to be a member to attend a class. Anyone can come and take these classes. All right. So now I'll leave us with this beautiful picture of the zinnias at the Kemper Center Garden. And I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have.
Sammy, thank you so much for sharing all that with us this morning. Just before we move on to the questions, I want to remind everyone, thank you for filling out the virtual sign-in sheet before you leave today. And then stay tuned for a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording of this program on YouTube. Plus, I know the top 10 sensory plants, that blog article, we'll include a link to that in the follow-up email as well, plus how you can register for that upcoming program next month. So anyone in attendance, feel free to continue submitting your questions. We've already gotten a couple here. The first one here, Sammy, is about storing, I guess, like dried plants. How should I store them so that I can share them with others? Like in paper bags, Ziploc bags, or something else?
Yeah, so I find with dried plants, but you want to make sure before you store them that they are completely dried to the touch. You don't want any moisture in there because that's how they can get moldy. And also before you dry them, I often rinse mine off just to make sure there's no little bugs or anything in there, especially if it's something I'm going to be eating. But once they're completely dried, my go-to is jars. So something that can have a seal on it. If you do have like a Ziploc bag, you can absolutely use those. Just make sure they're really tightly sealed, because that's a place where bugs and mice like to get into. Paper bags, I wouldn't recommend that for like long-term storage. If you're just passing it off to someone to give them some dried plants, that's fine. But something with a nice tight seal is going to be the best for that.
Sure, sure. One of the plants, Sammy, was the pansy, and I had no idea that you could use them. You said use a mallet to like press the imprint of the flower.
Yes, yes, it's great for arts and crafts, or if you want to make like a card. Yeah, it's a
Wow.
very useful plant.
Wow. And Sammy, will you be presenting the June session as well, or will that be Jeannie?
That will be Jeannie.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of a taste about what folks can expect in that presentation if you've hosted it before?
I have not hosted that one before.
Okay.
Yeah, but I imagine it's on well-being in the garden or in nature. Is that correct?
Deepening your connection to well-being.
Yeah, so that'll probably be more expansive on kind of the short intro that I gave to TH in the beginning and kind of the things that you can use in your own garden space. She's going to go over I imagine a number of different practices that you can do to deepen your connection with nature and feel those experiences of wonder through connecting with the different plants.
Great. And then I know you mentioned that the Botanical Garden, they have, you have a sensory garden. Is that sensory garden, are there plants that are growing in it year round, or is there a certain part of the year that folks should really stop by?
Spring and summer is when we have plants in there. So anytime you come between, I'd say, April to mid-October, there's going to be a lot of interest in there, especially through the summers, because that's when we can grow all of those herbs and those fun flowers that I was talking about that have that really long bloom time. That's when we have a lot of variety to grow a lot of things. In the spring, we still have a lot of wonderful things in there, like hyacinth, tulips, pansies, things of that nature in the springtime. But yeah, the summer's the really the time to go in and check it out, I think.
And seeing your picture of pansies, there's so many just gorgeous colors. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
They're some of my favorite plants.
It's hard to choose when you're buying them. There's so many options.
I love them. Well, Sammy, thank you again so much for sharing all that with us. Thank you to everyone in attendance. And once again, stay tuned for a follow-up email with some more information and the recording. And I'll go ahead and leave the Zoom up for a little bit longer so you can check the chat box for that virtual sign-in sheet. So, Sammy, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.